Hello. Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing well and you've been having a great summer so far. I know that, I live in Miami, so it's kind of always summer here, but it is nice to have a little bit of a rest and a relaxation with kids' schools um, and at least other people are on vacation. So sometimes it can be a little bit quieter, which is great. But I wanted to jump on today to share some thoughts that I have with other employer brand strategists relative to today's weaker than expected jobs report, which resulted in our stock market dropping and a potential recession here in the US. There's a lot of news about it now. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the impact it has in our world in employer branding, but more importantly, the potential opportunity that it could bring for employer brand leaders and just the employer brand function overall. So it just might be a take that you're not thinking of right now and could possibly ponder over the weekend. But first and foremost, we all know this is kind of regular part of our economic cycle. No need to kind of overly panic about it or overreact to the news. The cyclical nature of our economy is that it expands and contracts. I know there's been a lot of calls for the Fed to reduce interest rates, and that in and of itself would fuel spending, which would increase the stock market back up again. And obviously, hopefully would lead to kind of a hiring uptick as well. And obviously, the employer brand function, that's kind of one of the big benchmarks of our function is branding ourselves as a potential employer of choice to future talent. But what I wanted to talk about today, rather than kind of focus on the negative impact it has in terms of reducing hiring numbers, is just kind of reflecting overall how this could really empower us as employer brand leaders to be seen more as a strategic driver of the business. And what I mean by that is sometimes, what we hear a lot is the potential frustration or the challenge we have in employer branding to ensure that we're seen as a strategic driver rather than something that just can be turned kind of on and off relative to fluctuations in hiring. I think every employer brand leader will say that employer brand as a function is really an always on solution. You can't just focus on employer brand when you're hiring and then turn it off when you're not hiring. But if we think about the conversations that are probably happening in C-suites around the country right now, it is all about how do we manage during this economic downturn, and that really would primarily revolve around cost cutting. Because that's the quickest way to realize more value in the business. And particularly if you're working for a company that has shareholders or investors, you answer first to your shareholders and investors. And the way you do that is by showing financial stability, and in a kind of quick decision. A lot of times it is there spending that we can turn off right now? Is there anything we can do to kind of find those cost savings? So I think that one of the most frustrating parts for any business leader, especially outside of that sort of C-suite level, is when those decisions are made in a vacuum or they're made without you at the table. So as an employer brand leader, it might be a great opportunity to kind of proactively provide some ideas or solutions, either to your direct business leaders, whether that's the head of the HR function, or if you sit in strategic comms, or if you sit in the marketing function, and say, hey, given what's going on in the environment, given the economy right now, I have some ideas of ways that we can even temporarily streamline some of our costs that's not going to necessarily negatively impact your function overall. So the first kind of, I almost would say, one of the most obvious ways of looking at that, before you look at people, which is the most sensitive way of cost cutting, look at your tech stack. So as you're sitting on this podcast, or if you're listening, if you think about the tech solutions that you're using right now, how many do you think you're actually working with today? So if in the last couple of years, there has been a huge boom in tech solutions and the impact that they could have in your function in particular areas. So, solving a particular business issue or even reducing your reliance on external agencies or vendors in the employer brand world, things that you can almost self-service on your own. So if you think about that, how many of us are using graphic design platforms and not using, let's say, an advertising agency or a creative agency? How many of us are working with digital asset managers? How many are working with social advocacy platforms? How many people are using a video solution or a video studio? I mean, these are several different platforms, even digital marketing or job advertising. These are all different platforms that you might be using all of those platforms. You might be using some of those platforms, but they're separate instances. And so if you think about that and you think, how much am I paying annually to have subscriptions to each of those platforms? And how many tools am I actually asking users like my recruiters or hiring managers or even employer brand ambassadors, if you have those internally, how many am I asking them to use? And what does my adoption rate look like? So outside of the spend, is this a simple solution? Do I have a high adoption rate? How effective is it? And how many man hours am I asking people to put in? Or even in the employer brand world, how many man hours am I asking my team to put in to kind of synthesize that information? So this is definitely an area you can address. Simplification of your reliance on technology, your HR technology, would increase both the effectiveness of your area, meaning, is there one platform like a Clickify that does all of that in one? And, when you think about the ease of that, it's one login, it's one set of data. So you're not having to kind of go back and forth between platforms to see what that effectiveness looks like or what that adoption rate has been. It's one price. It is a kind of an all for one solution. That is something that is, even if you have many of these and you're not being asked right now to review it, these are kind of some easy solutions that you can start investigating right now. As I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, it's usually August is a pretty slow month in terms of people being on holiday, getting back to school. And it might be a great opportunity to just spend a few hours and look at what your dependence is on all of these different tech platforms and explore a potential solution like an all-in-one, like a Clickify, or even looking at what your focus is with your team right now, and can you reduce some of those man hours that are being spent kind of balancing all of this? The reality is all of us probably say we don't have enough resources to do our job. And the double-edged sword of that is when you are doing some of these amazing brand strategies and you're really launching these great programs and you have a really strong advocacy platform, as soon as people get comfortable with that, they will expect more and more and more from you and your team. So if you're in the boat of, hey, I'm looking to add people to my team in the next year, again, just given the current economic outlook, that might be 6 to 9 months down the road. So if you think about how can I reduce the amount of hours I'm spending in creating my assets or asking people to share them on their social media or spending less money on job advertising and creating more authentic, compelling stories and sharing that through our hiring managers, our recruiters. This is really something that if you want to try to make the most out of the least amount of time and resources, I think the tech stack is probably the first thing you can be looking at. At the end of the day, we all know, and anyone listening to this podcast knows how critical the overall ongoing engagement management of your company's employer brand is. it's just such a great time right now to show that outside of just the function of doing that, you're also a strategic business leader who understands the reality of the economy, the decisions, the very hard decisions that your company is likely going to have to make, and come to them with some solutions, come to them with some ideas before you're asked to do so, or before you're given the decisions that are made in that boardroom without your voice at the table. So I wish everybody luck. I know that, it's not great news to have today, but at the same token, it just gives us, I think, so much opportunity to show how strategic we as employer brand leaders can be. And I hope you have some great discussions over the next couple of weeks. And we're going to continue to talk about this with future podcast guests. We're going to talk about ROI. We've got some great podcasts that are coming up to give real life stories of what some leaders in our industry have done that hopefully you can take some things away from that. But I just wanted to take a minute to kind of reflect on today's news and give you some things to think about over the weekend as well. So hope everybody has a great week and a great rest of your summer months. And keep looking at this space to hear some more. And if you have any comments, please comment below, or please reach out to me on LinkedIn at Sondra Dryer. I'd love to maybe have you on the podcast or include you in one of our newsletters, our EB Insights newsletters, to talk about this. Maybe share some ideas that you've been doing in your own businesses, just so you can kind of share with your peer network as well. It's a great time for us to come together with these ideas and to kind of help one another.